Reading through the Bible, chapter 29, Jacob arrives in Paddan Aram. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the field with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. "And here comes his daughter, Rachel, with the sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It is better to give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to lie with her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her. And Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish out this daughter's bridal week, then I will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished out the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant girl Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maidservant. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. Notice that Jacob marries both women within 2 weeks, but he has to work another 7 years for Rachel. It seems that Laban forgot to tell Jacob that you always marry the older daughter before the younger daughter. But it now becomes very evident when it is too late for Jacob to do anything about it. So he now has 2 wives, and what he is doing for Laban is to take care of his sheep, as we will see just a little later. In verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." Reuben sounds like the Hebrew for "he has seen my misery." She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon, and Simeon means one who hears. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. So he was named Levi. And Levi sounds like the Hebrew word for attached. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah. And of course, Judah means to praise. Then she stopped having children. So it looks like the Lord has intervened because Leah is not loved. She is able to conceive and bears Jacob 4 sons. Now, of course, this is going to be a problem because you're dealing with sisters here, and sisters are in conflict. And Rachel is going to try to do something about this because her rival, Leah, has given birth to 4 sons. So in chapter 30, in verse 1, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" Then she said, "Here is Bilhah, my maidservant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son." Because of this, she named him Dan. And Dan means that he has judged. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." So she named him Naphtali. And Naphtali means my struggle. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her maidservant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Now, you will recall that Sarah had provided her maidservant Hagar as a wife, and this was common practice in the ancient East. In fact, there are some contracts which say that if the wife doesn't bear children, she is obligated to provide another wife for her husband. So then we'll go on, verse 10, it says, Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune!" So she named him Gad, which means a fortune or a troop. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "How happy I am! The women will call me happy." So she named him Asher, and Asher means happy. So far we have 4 children, 4 sons that were born to Leah, 2 sons that were born to the servant of Rachel, and 2 from the servant of Leah. So we have 8 children that have been born already. And then another development takes place. In verse 14, during wheat harvest, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Now, the mandrake plant is supposed to be an aphrodisiac. And it says that Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" "Very well," Rachel said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." So the bargain is that the mandrakes, which are plants that should cause conception, are given to Rachel, and Leah then gets Jacob, and she is going to become pregnant again. So in verse 16, when Jacob came in from the field that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a 5th son. Then Leah said, "God has rewarded me for giving my maidservant to my husband." So she named him Issachar. And Issachar sounds like the Hebrew for reward. And Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. Then Leah said, "God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor, because I have borne him 6 sons." So she named him Zebulun, which means honor. Sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, "God has taken away my disgrace." She named him Joseph and said, "May the Lord add to me another son." And Joseph means, "May he add." So Jacob now has 11 sons, and we are told of 1 daughter. Now, there may have been other daughters, but Dinah is going to be prominent in the story, so she is named. Oftentimes, a family will have several daughters, but unless they are active in the story itself, they are never named or numbered. So here we have Jacob with 11 sons and 1 daughter. 6 of those sons were born to Leah, and just 1 of them to Rachel.